He was offered a job to go and teach Chinese civilian pilots. Dan flies planes. It's a job.
Great group.
From Top Gun fighter pilot to solitary confinement in an Australian jail.
This is a country coming after my husband. One man against the US.
On 60 Minutes.
The military is privy to secrets and they cannot trade those secrets away.
America says Daniel Duggan gave military secrets to China.
So you would say these pilots are cashing in on their own country?
It's a betrayal.
And must be punished.
So not a single other pilot has been charged?
No.
Only Dan?
Only Dan.
Why?
That's the million-dollar question.
But his family say he's no traitor.
This is one big mistake.
He's a hero.
There's a hole in my heart. I don't have my dad anymore. He's gone.
Well, hello and welcome to the 60 Minutes podcast, Extra Minutes. I'm Amelia Adams and I'm joined by my colleague and very good friend, Dimity Clancey.
Hello, hello.
And for anyone who hasn't seen your story yet, they can of course watch it on 9Now and on YouTube.
Absolutely.
A fascinating story and quite complex as well. To start with, who is Daniel Duggan?
So Daniel Duggan is a 55-year-old father of 6. He is a former Marine fighter pilot who served in the US military for 12 years, from 1990 to 2002. He flew Harrier jets. He is a person who says he was very proud to serve his country.
Yeah.
Once he hung up his military helmet, he came to Australia in 2002 and has had very close connections to Australia ever since.
Okay, so he's hugely skilled and he went and did something that a lot of fighter pilots with his level of skill would do, which is to teach pilots in another country to fly.
Absolutely. It's a really specialised subset of skills that these pilots have. They're the best of the best, and as Daniel would tell you, he was invited to go to a flying school in South Africa, one of the top flying academies in the world, and he says it was an absolute honour to be asked to go and be one of the pilots to teach there because you're teaching with the best of the best. So he had a flying school called Top Gun Australia back in Tasmania. And he would call it like a corporate experience. So it was like a joyride.
And some of his clients, trainees, were Chinese civilians. So he says...
Yeah, so in that time that he had the Top Gun Australia school, he took multiple contracts to go and teach at the South African school. So he wasn't there consistently in South Africa. He would go multiple times between 2009 and 2012. The US would tell you that he was training Chinese military pilots. Daniel would tell you that they're civilian pilots. The difference between the two is one is obviously could be as simple as teaching in an airliner where you take off and, land and take off. The military is obviously far more tactical. And the US accuses him of sharing the US top secret intelligence, military secrets, which is a known thing that no service personnel should ever do once you're armed and you take that oath. They would say that he went over there and he was actually teaching military pilots.
Okay.
Then there's the question of Chinese military pilots.
Right.
So, and often those lines can be blurred.
So it's quite a grey area, but you can see why, from America's point of view, this is hugely problematic when you've got someone who maybe, as he's accused of, teaching pilots from China these tactics, which America, Australia does as well, holds very, very dear, very, very secret, because, of course, we don't want to be giving any other country, China or any other pilots, our military secrets. They're learning to fly and land on aircraft carriers or do all sorts of military routines and becoming quite adept in a way that America would like to keep secret.
Absolutely. And, Daniel will argue that he wasn't, of course, he wasn't teaching any of those or giving away any of his secrets. He was flying on aircraft that were older than what's currently used today, older technology. And he would also argue that he asked his boss, and did he need a licence? Another big part of this case was that the US says Daniel Duggan should have got approval from the US before going and teaching at this academy because of his military experience.
And what does that look like? Is that a special licence?
So it's a state-approved licence. So you basically need to get approval from the US to say that as lots of retired military pilots do, I'm going to go over to another country and I'm going to train. But the approval is, obviously, in the process would be, who are you going to train? What is their background? And that's where it becomes a grey area with China, is that a lot of pilots from China would have a reservist background.
Of course.
So it is quite muddied waters when and how can you really tell the difference between a civilian and a military pilot? But Daniel would argue that he asked his boss, do I need a licence? And he says he would never, ever risk his career or his reputation and do that. But the US will blatantly say in this 17-page indictment that he has done that.
So let's get to that, because in layman's terms, he's accused of being a traitor.
Absolutely.
Trading military secrets through this training. What are the indictable offences?
So it's basically they call it the Arms Export Control Act and International Traffic in Arms Regulations. So it's basically rolling on your own country to go over there, share your secrets to make money. I mean, let's not forget, these pilots do this. Money is a big draw card for these pilots. They go there and they do it because it's a quick hit of money, and they're specialised. It's a niche market for what they can offer.
But it's an incredibly serious charge. I mean, you cannot share or sell intelligence to other nations, high-risk nations at that. I mean,
Absolutely.
the US is clearly taking this very seriously, as they should.
Absolutely. And, it's gone before the grand jury in America, and the grand jury is different to how the judicial system works here. It's a bit of an older system. It's put towards like a jury of civilians, and the case is basically put before them and then they decide yay or nay. And in this case of Daniel Duggan, they've said yep. And so then the US has come to Australia, and as part of the treaty, as part of the Extradition Act, they don't have to prove anything to take him away first. It doesn't have to be tested in an Australian court, and that's a big problem for Daniel and his camp, is that they feel like he, at this point, has had no chance to defend himself. Yeah. He's also an Australian citizen. So back in 2012, he had met Saffrine, his wife, and before they headed off to China, he became an Australian citizen, but very curiously, and he's relinquished his US citizenship. So he's chosen not to be a dual national.
And that's key to his argument, is my understanding, that Australians can't be extradited on charges arising from US laws that there's no equivalent to here.
Yes, absolutely. And he would also argue that he, in fact, for 2 out of the 3 that I read of one of the allegations about him training these military pilots, is that it happened in 2 different months in 2012 after he became an Australian citizen. So that will form a big part of Daniel's argument that some of the allegations in this indictment, he actually was an Australian citizen.
Okay.
And that it's problematic when he was a US citizen, because Australia has only just in the last couple of months, or even in the last month, has brought in laws to match the US.
Yes.
And Britain did it back in 2022 to say that, to make it law, that you cannot, as a former military personnel, share your secrets.
Yeah, and my experience is in cases with the US, when they want to extradite someone, they've got a pretty strong hold on it. So it's a very, very complex legal case. There are obvious geopolitical forces at play here as well. But there's also a family here and a human side to it. Tell me about his family, his wife and his children. Where are they? What does their life look like at the moment? Because you went to visit them in regional New South Wales.
Yeah, they live in just outside of Millthorpe, which is a town in central West New South Wales. Very cute, very small. And, you just have to wonder what's going through the minds of Daniel's little children.
Yeah.
I think the youngest is 6 up until 18. They're trying to keep life as usual. Saffrine, Daniel's wife, is just obviously trying to keep things as, usual and life as normal for those children. He was arrested in October 2022 at the supermarket car park by Australian Federal Police. So whether or not they had any inkling that trouble was following Daniel, we don't know. But
their world was
they were
turned
certainly
upside
shocked.
down.
They were certainly shocked when Australian Federal Police turned up to the car park and arrested him. And that is the last time. He never came home that day. He made a cake for the school fete, he dropped the kids to school, and he went to the supermarket, and Saffrine, his wife, was waiting for him to bring her a coffee at his work and never turned up. And she says, ironically, she was going to call the police because he didn't turn up and she was worried that he was missing. And then she got a phone call to say that he was arrested, and then she said that, you know, the police officer looked at his case and said, oh, this is really serious, you need to get a lawyer, to which she Googled a lawyer.
She says she was sort of oblivious to all of this going on in the background.
Absolutely. I asked her in the interview, you know, did you ever think you didn't know something about your husband, or that his military experience or past was catching up with him? And she says she had no idea. Whether that was the case for Daniel, we don't know. But ever since October 2022, he's been sitting in maximum security. He's sharing jail cells with terrorists.
So he's in a cell in Lithgow, which is also just at the base of the Blue Mountains. And what does his daily life look like?
So Saffrine says he's in a 2x4 cell. He's in solitary confinement. He only gets a little bit of time out each week, but there's no one's allowed to be around. So if he goes out to the basketball court or the yard, he's only there by himself. He gets his food put through the slot, so he doesn't go and sit at a dining room.
Does he get visits from the kids?
He gets every Sunday. So every Sunday morning at 8:45, they get to go in and see him, and they get 1 hour with him. And, you know, it's heartbreaking for them because they've got 2 weeks. They've got one more visit next Sunday, and then after that, that could be the last time that they see their father.
So let's talk about that. Where is the court case, the extradition process up to at the moment?
Okay, so on May 24 will be the extradition hearing. So his legal team say that they are expecting for him to learn his fate on that day. And asking Saffrine, I said, well, what does that process look like? What will happen? And she says he'll be put straight on a plane and taken back to the US.
Wow.
You know, they're not Australian citizens. This is an Australian family. They can't just go and live there to go and see him regularly.
They're Australian citizens, they're not American citizens.
No, they're Australians. Yeah. And so she said, I just can't relocate the children. So then it's, you know, every time you want to see Dad, you're buying 6 plane tickets to the US, or 7 plane tickets to the US.
And what is he facing realistically if he is extradited and the process over in the US then begins? But what's the jail possibilities?
65 years.
Wow.
So he's 55 now.
Yeah, it's life.
So it's the rest of his life.
Did you have a chance to chat much with the kids? What was your sense of their take on all this, or how they're coping?
Yeah, you know, it was interesting because you got a little sense that they've got certain lines that have just been going around in their head, you know, and that the government's bad.
Yep.
They've taken our dad.
Yep.
They want him back. It's unfair. You know, he's an innocent man, and of course those children, he's their hero.
Yeah.
Daniel Duggan is his family's hero.
Sure.
But you wonder when it's all over, or when they don't get to go to see him in jail on a Sunday morning.
Yes.
What's going to go through their minds?
Yeah.
And you know, if he is extradited, the reality is they will probably never really see as Saffrine says, we'll never see him again.
Yeah.
It's just not going to be realistic to go over to a US jail and constantly visit him. So those kids, if he's extradited, will grow up without their father.
It's very sad, whichever way it plays out. The US, though, must have some pretty solid evidence to be extraditing and pursuing Daniel Duggan.
You would think that before they come hunting for Daniel Duggan that they have done their homework.
Yeah.
I don't think anything comes out here in the Australian process.
Yes.
I mean, certainly his legal team on May 24 will put forward their case, and they will put forward their evidence and why they say he should not be taken back.
Okay, so we learn a bit more then.
We will learn a bit more on May 24.
But to date, it's really been all about the extradition, hasn't it?
Absolutely, and we'll probably learn a whole lot more in the US. It'll either fall over, or we'll learn some really damning things about Daniel Duggan. So that will happen on May 24. Dan's family are confident. They will tell you that they don't have anything on him and that there are holes through this indictment. But, you know, they will match it up with China, 2012, you know, when China went from being the trading partner to being the enemy, the adversary. And that since then, China's relationship with the West has continued to break down, and Daniel Duggan is basically one man being used as a pawn in a geopolitical game, and being used to send a message to not do business with China.
And he did, interestingly, Dan Duggan move his family to China
He did.
for a time.
And while the allegations don't relate to his time in China, China's mentioned many, many, many times.
China's
throughout
everywhere
this
in this
indictment.
story, isn't it?
Absolutely. And so he moved the family there in 2014. After 6 years, Saffrine and the children come home. By that stage, the Chinese government, for some reason, and it is unclear why, the Chinese government has confiscated Dan's passport. Let's remember, this is a man who was also under the watch of ASIO, of US naval investigators. He'd met a number of times with them back in Australia. For which reason, we don't know. The family will say that they were actually asking him to gather information in China. It's murky.
It is.
It's not clear. But he was under the watch of authorities, and it would take Dan 2 more years to get back to Australia. So he arrives back home in September 2022, and 1 month later is when he is arrested by federal police here in Australia in that car park in Orange.
And he's been sitting in a jail cell ever since.
Yeah. So trouble, wherever it was caused, whatever he has done, if he has done anything, has followed him all the way back to Australia.
Well, it's a fascinating case, and as you say, we'll learn more at the end of the month when the extradition hearing gets underway, whether he's a loyal soldier, pilot, or a national traitor will be for the courts to decide. But either way, he does have a wife and family sitting at home waiting for their dad and husband to come home. Great story, Dimity. And if anyone hasn't watched it, they can watch it on 9 Now or catch up on YouTube.
Great.
So thank you for joining us.